Hello and welcome. My name is Whitney and I'm an anesthesia intern documenting my journey as I go through my first year of residency. I just finished my second week of nights, so I'll just be going over how the rotation is going so far. In my previous video, I talked a bit about what we actually do when working on nights. I talked about like what admitting is and what that looks like, and also what cross coverage is. So for today's video, I'm going to be doing something a little bit different, and I'm actually going to go over how it has been adjusting to the schedule of working on nights. I have done a little bit of nights earlier in the year during my emergency medicine rotation, but that was just like 4 shifts in a row. So there really wasn't any need to adjust my schedule just because it was for such a short amount of time. But this time on my first block of nights, it's 3 weeks long, so I actually really need to adjust my schedule just because it is for an extended period of time. So we'll just talk about how that's been going and what I've been doing to kind of help with that adjustment. So let's go ahead and get into it. So, to start this conversation, I will first just put a little reminder that these shifts that I was working started at 6:30 p.m. and then went all the way until 6:30 a.m. And I knew this was going to be challenging to switch because this truly was like a full switch of my schedule. Usually I would go to bed between like 9 and 10 at night and then wake up at like 5:30 or 6, and instead I would be, like just getting off of work at 6:30 a.m. and then having to sleep. So I was really, like going to bed when I would usually be waking up. So I knew this was going to be pretty challenging to begin with. And because of that, I knew I kind of had to set like a goal for myself, or maybe I didn't have to, but I just knew it would be easier for me if I did set a goal. And instead of focusing on, like night one, wanting to be like super awake and alert all night, I didn't make that my first goal. I actually made it my first goal to focus instead on wanting to be sleepy when I got off of work, just because I knew that was going to be really hard for me. And I just thought if I could just get myself on this pattern right off the bat, maybe it would be easier to transition if I just like really focused on wanting to be sleepy when I got off of work. I could really just get into that schedule early on in the rotation. So to make sure that I was really tired at the end of my first shift, I had a feeling that I would probably just have to be tired throughout my entire first shift, right? Like if I just started the shift sleepy, I would probably end the shift sleepy as well, just because I'd be, like really working hard and then doing that while tired. So that was my plan for the very first day, to just go into my first shift being a little bit more tired than usual. And the way that I did this was the night before I actually started nights, I focused on staying up really late. And for me, I think I went to bed at like 2 or 3 in the morning, which isn't super late in general, but for me, I felt like that was staying up pretty late. So I, like waited until I was super tired, and then I went to bed. And I didn't try to wake up early, but I feel like just having my internal alarm clock, I woke up a little bit earlier than I wanted. I think I woke up at like 9 or 10 or something like that. So I didn't get a ton of sleep. So I was still sleepy when I woke up. And even though I was tired, it was okay because my first night was actually super, super busy. So even though I felt kind of tired, I feel like I didn't notice as much just because there was so much that had to be done that I kind of just like pushed through. And it was so busy that I think the first time I actually looked up to see what time it was like 1 or 2 in the morning. So at that point, I only had like 4 or 5 hours left working overnight. And so I feel like that was seemed a lot more doable. So yep, I just worked through the night, was very tired, and then I got off my shift and I was still tired, which that was my plan all along. And it ended up working out okay because at that point, I just like went home and did my little nighttime routine, which I'll talk about in a second. And then I went to bed pretty much right away. And I think I got like 7 or 8 hours of sleep. And when I woke up at that point, it was like 3:30ish in the afternoon. And I actually felt like pretty refreshed. And I felt like, oh, okay, like I got a good amount of sleep. So I feel like I'm ready for the next night. So it ended up working out well with that little plan I had in the beginning to just, maybe be tired a little bit in the beginning, but just to be able to go home and be sleepy and then get a good amount of sleep. I think that actually worked out really well for me. And I think one thing that I kind of knew going into it and that I just had to accept is that at some point I was going to be more tired than I probably wanted to be while working, but I just knew there was like no way around it. Honestly, like you're going to be sleepy at some point, so why not just like make yourself a little bit sleepier in the beginning? And that way like you're on the right path and you feel like you can like go in sustaining that schedule. So that worked out really well for me. And now let's talk a little bit about a couple of the other things I did just to make sure that I was able to sustain this schedule. So the first thing I'll talk about is caffeine. I think I've mentioned this in an earlier video, but one of the pieces of advice I got before starting residency is to figure out how caffeine affects you. And I think that was actually really useful information to like actually think about. So I am actually, I don't know what it is about caffeine in me, but caffeine usually lasts a really long time with its effects on me. So I don't know exactly how long it affects me, but I know that during, like the daytime, if I'm trying to, be awake during the day, I try not to have caffeine past noon or I will be like up all night. Like usually if that happens, I'm up until like 2 to 3 o'clock in the morning. So I know it just lasts a really long time in my system for some reason. And I knew that going into this rotation. So knowing that my goal was usually to, try to be sleepy when I'm done with my shift, I really had to time how much caffeine I actually like had in my system when I was awake. So I did a little bit of testing and I figured out that I can have caffeine right when I wake up. And I usually was waking up at like 3:30 or 4. So I could have some coffee then or, just some kind of caffeinated drink right when I woke up. And the latest that I would be willing to have caffeine when I was working nights was by 7 p.m. So after 7 p.m., I really didn't want to have any other caffeine because I knew that it lasted in my system a long time and I knew that when I got home I really wanted to go to sleep easily. So I didn't let myself have caffeine too late. And I know everyone's a little bit different with caffeine. So I think that advice I got of just like trying to figure out how caffeine affects you was actually really useful because I knew for me that I would have to limit myself, but there were people that I worked with on nights who could have caffeine at like midnight and they were totally fine. So it really just depends on the individual. So, in addition to caffeine and watching its intake, another thing I did on a daily basis to make sure that I was sleepy was I tried to create kind of like a bedtime routine that I would eventually come to a point of just associating going to bed. So, what I would do is when I got home, I would kind of just like put my stuff away a little bit. But instead of really focusing on like getting ready for my next shift, which I used to do and I talked about in a previous video, I really just made it my goal to just get to bed as quickly as I could. So what I would do is I would just like come home, drop off my stuff, and I would pretty much just take a shower and go to bed. But before I took my shower, I would take a melatonin which helps kind of like sleep in a way. I took a melatonin before I took a shower, and then I would go to bed. And I actually got that piece of advice from one of these seniors I was working with on nights. And she had a really good point of, just like taking the melatonin and letting it work in your system. And then like while you're taking a shower and then just go to bed. So I think that actually really helped out a lot. And eventually I that like really worked for me where I would just take a melatonin, take a shower, brush my teeth, and then go to bed. I really didn't have issues with sleeping at all, like falling asleep. And I thought that was going to be a big problem for me because it was like bright out and, like I associate that with being up. So I was worried about that. But the little routine or the trick of like having a melatonin and then taking a shower and then going to bed actually really, really helped for me. Another thing I did, which I think was really helpful, is I slept with an eye mask. And I usually am not the person to do that, but it worked out so well. I found just like a cheap one on Amazon where it was an eye mask and instead of having it like flush against your face there was like a padding around it so there was no pressure like on my eye, so it was actually really comfortable and it blacked out everything like even if I slept with like the curtains open or whatever, I feel like I couldn't even tell just because the eye mask worked so well. So I used the eye mask, and then we also have blackout curtains, which I think just like really helped as well, just because our room can get pretty bright, especially during the day. So I think those just couple of little tricks really helped me be able to fall asleep quickly when I got home, which was always my plan. And finally, the last thing I did to help with my schedule and the adjustment is to keep with the same routine on my nights off. And I feel like that was pretty common, honestly. Like, I think most people do that, but I thought I would just say it here just in case anyone was curious. Yeah, so if I, on my nights off, I would still try to keep that same sleep schedule. And now that I'm 2 weeks in, I feel like it's been really easy to. Like, I stayed up until like 5 a.m. on my last night off. So it's, yeah, I can say I've fully flipped. And now that I only have a week left, it's almost time to flip back. So there we go. All right, well, that's really all I have to say about my switch over to nights and the adjustment to the schedule. So we'll go ahead now and end the video by looking at how many hours I worked this week. So I'll go ahead and just pull them up here. And yes, you can see another 5 day week. And this week I had Monday and Thursday off. So again, this isn't a rotation where you get in earlier than your shift or leave later than your shift. It really is just being there for the full 12 hours. So I worked a total of 60 hours this week. Okay, so thank you so much for coming along with me on today's video. I have one more week of nights to go, so I will be back then to talk about how the rotation went and to talk about what I'm going to next. All right, thank you so much for coming along. Take care, everyone.